Hello everybody, welcome back to the afternoon session. I hope you managed to grab a bite of lunch there and everybody seemed to be enjoying themselves, that I was chatting to anyway. Our first afternoon panel tackles one of the most interesting and genuinely difficult questions in Irish politics right now, not whether constitutional change is coming, but how those who believe in it might persuade others that it's the right thing and how they should talk about it in a way that reaches beyond the ranks of those who are already convinced. The conversation about a new Ireland has evolved. It's no longer a discussion that happens only within traditional nationalist circles. People from all kinds of backgrounds, people who perhaps aren't rooted in either tradition, people who've moved here from elsewhere, and younger people who approach these questions without the baggage of the past are engaging with it in new ways. But that creates its own challenge. How do advocates build a genuinely broad coalition? How do you talk about constitutional change in a way that speaks to people's real lives and their hopes rather than just their identities and aspirations? And how does Northern Ireland present itself to the rest of the island as a place of potential rather than a problem to be managed? So we've got a great panel here. Starting from just beside me, we've got Colum Eastwood, the MP for Foyle, who's been making the case for a new Ireland, not just as a constitutional aspiration, but as a practical, positive vision. You're very welcome, Colum. At the end, Linzi McLaren, former Ulster Unionist councillor and commentator, whose perspective has often made headlines and sparked debate on this subject. I think she's switched positions, and that's been picked up on in the media. Linzi, great to have you here. Just next to Colum, we've got Sinéad Gibney TD for the Social Democrats, who's brought a fresh and often challenging voice to debates about identity rights and what a new Ireland should actually stand for. Sinéad, you're very welcome. And finally, a somewhat jet-lagged Kwame Daniels from North Star, just fresh back from a run of shows in New York with his groundbreaking production, which is based on Frederick Douglass's famous quote, "I will always have a home in Belfast." And with his experience of newcomer voices to Northern Ireland, Kwame, I'm delighted that you can join us. As with the previous panels, we're going to give you each 2 minutes to set out your stall. The broad question that I've got maybe that Colum you could address first of all is, if support for constitutional change is going to grow, what's the most important conversation you are currently not having with the people you need to persuade?
Well, I think we actually are having them. There's been a lot of talk, obviously, this morning about unionism and how unionism will engage, and that is really important in terms of how we build a nation and all of that. But we just have to be, I think, realistic about political unionism's involvement in this conversation and when they will get involved, but it may be much later on in the process. The reality is what we're talking about in the first instance is winning a referendum. It's an election. It's a simple enough thing, you know. There are lots of people like myself who will always vote for it. There are lots of people like Arlene Foster, for example, who says she might leave. I don't think she will leave and I hope she doesn't, but who will never vote for it. But the people in the middle are the people who are going to decide this. It's basically alliance voters and new voters who are going to decide what happens in the future and to this country. So basically, I think we should be relentlessly focused on them, relentlessly focused on talking to them about what makes them tick, what will change their mind. And we are speaking to them, and what they're telling me is actually they're very fed up with Stormont. They've lost total faith in Stormont. And I'm not happy about that, but that's just the reality of what people are saying. They're very disappointed at the state of the health service. It used to be that the health service was the trump card in the unionist argument. But now, if you live in Derry, it's going to take you 6 years to see a consultant if you're suspected of having Alzheimer's. People in my constituency are going to the credit union to borrow money to go private for something called the National Health Service, which was supposed to be free at the point of delivery. If you can't get delivery, then you have to pay. So all of those arguments are the things that I think that we can turn people on, that we can change people's minds on. If we can show that people's everyday life will be better, then this will be something that I actually think we're going to win this. I think it's not that hard a conversation. It's not going to be that big a task when we get into the weeds of what it's actually going to be about.
Linzi, can I maybe come to you next, because obviously, as I say, you were an Ulster Unionist councillor there. You've switched your view. I suppose you're somebody who has been persuaded. So what kind of practical things persuaded you?
Yeah, so thank you, first of all, for the invitation to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. Yeah, my political journey, I suppose, is somewhat surprising to people. Obviously, I grew up in a unionist family, unionist voting family, I suppose, but not a political family in any way. Then got interested in politics, and I was sold very much on a union for all. But unfortunately, during my time, right in the heart of unionism, for me, that union for all wasn't necessarily something that was a reality. So I chose to resign my seat, and funny, I've been busier since resigning my seat than I ever was. So I remember my daughter, my eldest daughter, who's 27, always says, you know, Mummy, when you left the Ulster Unionist Party, you really left the Ulster Unionist Party. And I think I've done a full 180 now. Saying that, I think someone who has been on that transformative journey, or people like me, of whom there are many, and almost a sense of enlightenment politically, they are often the most fierce voices for advocacy, for reunification, because they recognise the struggle that they've had to get there. I'm in a group called, we call ourselves the Happy Lundies. And actually, the most incredible group of people. There are a few here today. I've wonderful friends now in a group called Ulster Says Yes. So there are many little groups of people like me, and I think that's what I wanted to focus on today, was the fact that I've always been adamant that demographics and that ever increasingly important middle ground, which Colum has alluded to, will determine the constitutional future in Northern Ireland. But very often, that middle ground, which includes small U unionists or liberal unionists or progressive unionists or however you want to describe them, are often ignored. Just because they don't stamp up and down and they're not very prevalent on Twitter, or they're not out in the streets in the middle of a riot or going to a bonfire or marching behind a band, doesn't mean they don't exist. And they have to have a place at the table. I think Ian had mentioned earlier about how difficult it is for unionists to engage in a subject if their future is on the table. But I actually think that's the very reason why they need to engage, and the very reason why people who are now advocate for reunification need to understand the importance of that. It's not an orange and green issue anymore, and it needs to step away from that. That middle ground are people who are disenfranchised, they're angry, they're frustrated, they are seeing a very poor level of delivery for instalment, and they are the people who are open to persuasion, open to the conversation. And I very much enjoy the opportunity then here today to be able to bring those burning questions to the fore and give people the answers that they deserve.
Okay, thanks very much, Linzi. Kwame, can I maybe come to you next? I mean, I don't know whether you want to address this question or whether you maybe just kind of want to set out your stall, because obviously in terms of the middle ground, if you like, that also involves people who come here from elsewhere, who sadly have been the focus of attention in recent weeks for all the wrong reasons. It was a good time to be in New York.
Yeah, it certainly was.
Not a great time to be here. But please just sort of introduce yourself and say what your thoughts are on this in broad terms.
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much. It's great to be here. I suppose the question of, how we talk about a new Ireland, I think the best way is just to present, who I am and where I sit. So essentially, I'm a black man, born in London, of Ghanaian heritage, that moved to Derry in 1997, that is now living in Belfast in 2013, with a family of mixed heritage. So, you can unpick that in your own time, but that's that's what we've got to talk about. There's going to be people that, as you were just saying before, it's not about green, white, and orange or red, white, and blue now. There are so many. It has to be a pluralistic approach in terms of how we think about it. It has to be multiple entry points. There has to be multiple takeaways. So every conversation has to incorporate a joined-up thinking, a lateral thinking. And in that, I suppose the sector that I operate in, which is the creative and cultural sector, is that why I'm so passionate about that being at the centre, and that's why I'm so glad to be here as well, and very forward-thinking, by the way, Claire Hannah, SDLP, of putting this, and in this venue as well, is that it's this sector that holds those sort of conversations. We were just saying about North Star coming back from New York, and I'll get into all that, but essentially North Star is about a moment that Frederick Douglass said, wherever else I feel myself to be a stranger, I will always have a home in Belfast. This is essentially an immigrant and enslaved man on the run in 1845. And, quote unquote, both sides of the community, and we know there's more than that, came together to help him raise funds to purchase his freedom. That's 1845. We fast forward to 2026, and I'm in New York, and it's landing unbelievably well. And yet, the week that I flew back to see my youngest son is the very day that it was all kicking off here. So I've come from this warm hug from New York, welcoming this beautiful story from Belfast, and I fly back into groups of young men burning black and brown people out of houses. So me trying to put all that together is a lot. So going forward, there are so many points of discussion, and they can't all be in isolation. I think that's my point, and that's why I'm excited to be part of this conversation. I think there has to be a joined-up thinking in this going forward if we are to talk about a new Ireland.
Thanks very much, Kwame. Sinead, here from the Social Democrats, representing a Dublin seat. I think you were making the point to me when we were chatting earlier that whilst Claire Hannah might be the most popular leader in the newspaper polling here, it's Holly Cairns down in the south of the moment, so you're on the march. Obviously, if there is a new Ireland, it's going to be a vote on both sides of the border. How much is this a live debate in your constituency? Is it something that you're talking about every day or not at all?
Thanks so much, and thanks so much for the invitation to be here and for hosting such an important discussion. It's not a point of discussion every day, far from it. And I think that's one of the first things I wanted to call out, I guess, is that as we're talking about all of this, we have to recognise the political bubble that we are all in. I mean, if you're on the stage today, or indeed if you're in the audience, you are engaged in this discussion at a rate that many, many people in my community are not. And that is just the simple reality of it. It's not something I'm very proud of, but people in the South just do not understand this topic. And so I suppose when I come at this and addressing the question of this particular panel, which is about persuasion, I think one of the things that we might need to anticipate is that there are decades here of community building that have happened since the truce and since the Good Friday Agreement. I studied here during those years, 94 to 98. And I have worked in a professional capacity in cross-border institutions since then. So I'm quite unique, I think, amongst my peers in having a deep understanding of the North, of Northern Ireland, of the relationships, and the culture here and how different it is at times. I mean, there are plenty of similarities, but there are plenty of ways in which it's very different. And I do not think that is shared. And in fact, I would describe it sometimes as a staggering ignorance on the part of people in the South as to what is happening here, what has happened here, what the perspectives are from people on both sides of the divide, if you like, still here. So I think that's something we have to be cognizant of, and I think there will have to be patience as people catch up. So I do think that's something as political leaders we have to take a role in bringing people there, but also just understand that as people from Northern Ireland, you have a much deeper understanding of simply what cross-community building is, which is just obviously going to continue as a feature in any discussions about the future of this island. And I also think we need to bring humility, because when I think about persuasion, the thing that strikes me most is that to be somebody who is effective at persuading, you have to listen. And I think we've talked a lot today about the unionist perspective, and as a party, we want to really be able to engage across the political divide, and perhaps as a younger party, without some of the legacies of other parties, we might be able to do that, and we are actively trying to do that at the moment, is make sure, because, and I didn't agree with all of what Jim O'Callaghan said earlier, but I do agree with one thing that he said, which is I think there is conscious awareness amongst all of the parties in the South, or, well, many of them, that unionism as an identity needs to be protected in any future united Ireland. And that is just a reality of it, and it's something that we certainly will respect and do respect as a party. So I'll leave it there for now. Thanks.
Okay, thanks very much, Sinead. I mean, Colum, I suppose there's a couple of people you need to persuade. You need to persuade the floating voters here in Northern Ireland. It may also be that some of Sinead's constituents who either haven't thought about it or maybe just think of Northern Ireland as a bit of a basket case, particularly after what they've seen in the last week on their TV screens. They may need persuading as well.
I'm sure they do. Actually, you know, we're running 2 referendum campaigns, probably at the same time. But that's why you've heard it so many times today. The Irish government needs to lead in this space. I mean, I think what we're sort of missing in some of this conversation is that this is not all in our hands. The decision about when a border poll is called will be called in London. And it'll very likely be called for political reasons or parliamentary realities. It won't be called for the right reasons. Those things never happen. So people talked earlier about a potential reform government. I think that's very likely. Or Andy Burnham could turn it round. But him going from this position to a majority within 3 years, whenever the election is a big, big ask. So, I mean, you could be in a situation where the parliamentary arithmetic leads to smaller parties having influence and power and questions being asked. And the end of the next parliament is potentially 8 years away. That's not a very long kind of way away, but it's also not that early. So you could conceivably have a border poll by the end of the next parliament, and we just need to think about all those factors that are outside of our control. But if we all understand that large parts of the southern kind of electorate aren't engaged in this issue, then well, that's up to politicians and it's up to the government to lead and to be prepared and to do the work. What we have up here is a generation of people screaming because they feel stuck. They feel that Stormont doesn't deliver for them. They feel that they can't get access to the economy. They see the health service has basically collapsed. They have no proper infrastructure development, and they look across the border and go, well, why can't we have some of that? And then they are told by certain politicians in Dublin that actually, no, you're just going to have to wait. You have to reconcile first. Well, I'm sorry, I don't think people are prepared to wait any longer. People are in an urgent mood for change, and I think we need to be all playing our part in helping bring that about.
Linzi, we were talking earlier about how the mainstream unionists are not getting involved, don't want to get involved. Why should we go there? They may look at you and say, well, that's the reason why we're not getting involved. You get involved in this, you get converted.
The irony isn't lost on me. Yeah. Can I just sort of say before I move on to that we are very lucky to have Kwame here today, because earlier I made a very unfortunate wrong turn into the men's toilets. And
Wives here?
And I apologise profusely. Yes,
You're breaking
yes.
down barriers, Linzi, but not in the way.
Absolutely. I feel that's my job. But yes, in relation to me having been converted, I think first, interestingly, and just to pick up a wee bit on what Colum was saying there, the reason I ended up in this journey and ended up getting converted was more as a result of my dissatisfaction and frustration and anger at the behaviour of political unionism. And I felt, therefore, principally, I needed to turn my back on it, because many unionists with a small u definitely feel that they are not politically represented. I felt politically homeless. And I think I have to also then express my huge disappointment and naivety in my assumption that the government in the South would be chomping at the bit to engage with people like me and engage with people who are open to persuasion and open to the conversation, only to find that actually we are seen as a political and economic nightmare. So essentially Northern Ireland is a little bit of nobody's child, because we are way down the list of priorities for Westminster. That's an absolute fact. I think Colum and Claire might be able to attest to the fact that any time Northern Ireland is mentioned in Westminster, the floor vacates, and you're usually talking to only a few people. So I do want to see that starting to change and change significantly and change very quickly. In terms of me being seen as a symbol of being converted, that probably is why political unionists will absolutely shut down the conversation at all turns. I used to think it was because, well, why do I want to talk about it? It's we want to remain in the union. But in actual fact, on reflection, I think they understand that there is less of a positive argument to be made for the union now. And they understand that the NHS is crumbling, the economy is a nightmare, we're involved in foreign conflicts that we've no need to be in. They're on the wrong side of history in terms of Palestine. All these things that are turning people away, Irish language. And I think by shutting down that conversation, they are doing the people of Northern Ireland such a grave disservice. Because whilst, yes, I admit I am converted and I am all in, and I have went from, I feel like I'm at an AA meeting here now, and I'm going to, I used to be a unionist, I am absolutely now a nationalist. Did I get an award for that? Or coin or something. Oh God! Sorry. That does not mean that political unionists have the right to stymie that conversation. And we need to keep calling that out and keep challenging that because it is no longer acceptable.
Kwame, obviously it's impossible to kind of generalise about newcomer communities because there's so many different types of newcomer apart from anything else. But I do remember when I did a film about sort of 100 years of Northern Ireland back in 2021, and some of the people I was talking to at that stage in my communities, their majority opinion was, this is not really our issue, you know, we just want to get on, make our lives, integrate as best we can. I don't know, has that changed in the meantime? It's hard to say, to be completely general about it, I know.
Yeah, it's a great question. I suppose I can only say from my point of view that it's never been a case of, and no, I'll tell you what, maybe it's different because I was born in London and I came here, so I had a sense of what was going on and context and so on and so forth.
Derry did you no harm me there.
Sorry?
Derry did you no harm me there.
No. My 13 years in Derry, absolutely, yeah, shaped the man that you see in front of you.
He put the London into Derry, yeah?
Yeah.
Took it right back out again.
I've got a note here of uncomfortable honesty, but I'm not going to go on it. But to your question, like my experience of moving here and living here would be different to say, like, even within my own family, my brother and sister who were born in Ghana, and if they'd come from Ghana to here, that might have been the approach of, do you know what, I've got enough to be dealing with without getting in the middle of what I think is going on here. Whereas because I had more of a sense of what was going on, I don't know, and the area that I was in was education, community outreach. I put on events in my previous life while still sort of existing life as a DJ. Therefore, it was all about bringing people together. So that was always my passion point. That was always the passion, the purpose of it. So I don't think I would have ever allowed myself that viewpoint of, you know what, we'll just let everyone crack on here and I'll just sort of, forge my own path. But I suppose that's just me. But I also think that's crucial. Again, back to this question here. I think it's crucial that members of the creative and cultural sector, and I feel a personal responsibility, is that we've got to be that. We've got to create that space. And I'll tell you a very quick example I actually think it was in here. And it was 2006 or 7, and I was invited onto a panel, and it was essentially talking about, community creating neutral spaces, so on and so forth. And it was myself and there were 2 other people on the panel. And I was brought there, obviously, to bring my perspective. I'm a Londoner, I'm a black man, I'm living here, no problems. And I can honestly say within about 7 minutes, we had gone back to the conversation of green, white and orange versus red, white and blue. And I remember at that stage, I was like, oh my gosh, we've got so much work to do, because the very forum that this was set up for, and I got it as well over the years, I understood that there was a lot of pain and there was a lot to be discussed, and I got it fairly early on. But I think the result of that is what we're seeing now, is because there wasn't space allowed for my viewpoint and that conversation to start nearly 20 years ago. I think that's a massive contributor to where we are now, is that now we are absolutely forced to talk about this. And if we don't, the ugly beast that is racism that we've seen now, we call it what it is now at the table, and it's here. And if we don't nip it in the bud now going forward, it's going to cause us huge problems, because we have a growing newcomer community. We have, and that offer so much, and if they do not feel a sense of, if they're not unable to feel at home, then I think we're in for a troubled path going forward.
Sinead, maybe you're in a party that's very much pro-migration, but these arguments come up on the doorsteps as you're going around in Dublin. So I suppose, what did you make of the images about Belfast in recent days? And do you think that would enforce the difficulty of persuading people where you represent that a new island is a possibility, I suppose?
I found it heartbreaking, and I think, like many others, and appalled at the racism that was on display. I suppose one of my areas of focus is tech, so I think we need to really address at the moment. We're talking about future political challenges. I think that will dominate in so many ways: artificial intelligence and technology more broadly, and the disinformation that proliferates, and at the moment, in that example specifically, the fomenting. And tech companies are making profit off radicalization and polarization of society. So it would have been quite reasonable to expect, had an incident like that happened, that there would not have been the ensuing violence in a world where tech was not a player within it. I'm not saying it's completely responsible for it, but I do think that was one of my biggest kind of reactions. Does it make the conversation more difficult? I don't think so, because I think the same experience is happening all across this island, all across these islands, and all across the globe, and something that we have to push back on very clearly with left-wing values. And we had a by-election recently in Dublin, and our candidate, Dan Ennis, won in the Dublin Central constituency. And Dan is a really exciting voice for me of working-class Dublin, who is very, very openly and unashamedly pro-migrant. And on the doorstep, that is a challenge. Like in my own constituency, in every single constituency now, you might be talking to people for a couple of minutes, and then eventually it will just drop in, where it'll be, well, of course, if we weren't letting so many people in, or whatever way they want to put it, they'll throw in this association of what I would describe as the failures of the government, but whatever way you want to say it, like the fact that services are scarce, the fact that people are facing a lot of difficulty in their day-to-day lives, and then they pin the blame on migrants to do that. So that's happening everywhere, and what we're trying to do as a party is really establish ourselves as being very honest, being very unashamedly pro-migrant to combat that. And I think we have to do that within the context of this discussion. But I do think it's interesting because, I mean, whatever way we talk about racism right now and how to deal with that, I mean, the fact is that new communities are changing the face of demographics in Northern Ireland, and that's exciting. That changes the numbers, for example, and it means that those voters in, you know, unknown territories are now of a whole different, you know, range of backgrounds that we have to work with and to persuade and so on. So our focus as a Social Democratic Party is for a Social Democratic Ireland, and that's what we focus on. We've never had that in the Republic. We've had governments who have had policies that are, you know, could be described as socially democratic. We've had initiatives and cross-party work that is socially democratic, but we've never actually had a commitment to the contract that you pay your taxes and you expect in return a suite of high-quality public services. And for me, I think the work that we're doing and the work that the SDLP do is very focused on that. And of course, we're not the only parties that are working in that vein. But I think that's what voters will respond to, is recognising the pain that people are feeling right now in terms of cost of living. People need homes, people need childcare that they can afford, and that's, for me, how we unify everybody within the dialogue. And I think maybe one of the other things, just to add as a final point in this, is, like, I mean, our experience of referendums as well is maybe something that we can bring to the table. And what I mean by that is, you know, the marriage equality referendum and the abortion referendum, they moved dialogue on. And I think, you know, whatever you think about the readiness of different political parties, either side of the border, to discussing a united Ireland or constitutional change, the main discussion will happen not once we commit to a referendum, but during that time when people start to realise that they will have to cast a vote, or that they will have the option to cast a vote. And it was amazing to see the transformation in public opinion in those referenda. And I mean, it was very much in stark difference to what happened then in Brexit, which was plagued by misinformation and disinformation, which brings us back to tech and what we have to do to protect democracy. But that, for me, is really exciting because, you know, like, we can scar the country if we don't do it right, but we can stimulate the kind of debate that needs to happen by introducing it in the right way.
Colum, we're getting close to the end of this session now, so maybe just in conclusion, come back to the art of persuasion. I mean, in terms of floating voters, the problem of departing from status quo is it's always a risk, and quite often that could be a risk in terms of, you know, pension, healthcare, you know, bread and butter politics. How do you go about reassuring them that the risk is worth it?
Well, part of that is, again, back to the thing is having the preparation done. So I don't think most referendums are actually won by heart over head, but you have to sort the head bit out first. You have to make people feel comfortable that the health service is going to be okay, that there's not going to be any violence, and that their pensions are going to be fine, and whatever other issues there are. But we also then, once we've nailed that, have to sell a vision of hope. I mean, I think the lesson of, there's been a lot of talk this week about what happened in Makerfield last week. That was the most hopeful campaign I've seen in many, many years, and people came out in their droves. People who 5 weeks before were voting 50% for reform. Andy Burnham won by 20 points because he gave a hopeful message that people could buy into, and people believed it. So I think that's there's a lesson in that for us, and there's been other examples of this over the years as well, but where we sell a positive vision. We know all the things that are wrong, but what can be better? And it's the same for the South. I mean, at the end of the day, the South is bursting at the seams economically. It needs more room. It needs more space to grow. There's a positive argument to be made there. There's a positive argument to be made to young people from all backgrounds that we're going to be back at the heart of the European Union again. There's a positive argument to be made about the economy and our children not having to emigrate. They can stay here and be part of it and do well. There's lots of very positive things. And I think if we remember that this isn't, again, about the past, it's not about green and orange, it's about all those issues that people care about, making those better for people. And if we wrap it in that, in a hopeful context, we're going to win. We just are. I mean, the focus groups are very clear. The people in the middle, frankly, aren't bothered about flags or anything else. What they're thinking about is the health service. What they're thinking about is their pension. So we can convince those people. We have to do all the good things about protecting unionism and all that. But in terms of winning the referendum, we have to show people that their future will be better and more hopeful. And I think we absolutely can.
Colum, thanks. I have to bring this session of Alcoholics Anonymous, Linzi, to a close. Thank you very much to Colum, Linzi, Sinead and Kwame.